Hello there. Today, we are going to take this wonderful chance here at the end of a term to kind of stop and wrap our heads around where we're coming from and where we're going as far as your math standards go. So what you need to do this today is you need two blank pieces of paper. I have lined paper here, and that's what most of you have. That'll work just fine. If you had some blank printer paper, really any two blank regular sizes piece of paper will do the trick. You will also need some scissors. If you absolutely don't have any scissors, you can kind of carefully rip it and make it work. Scissors will be better. So we're going to start by taking these two papers and folding them in half. I will show you what I mean. Okay. I have my two pieces of paper folded in half. Make sure they go this direction. So I went folded in half, whatever you want to name it. People have all kinds of names for these things, but make sure you got yourself a good crease folded in half this way, both pages folded in half the same direction. Okay. All right. Now take one of them, doesn't matter which one, and take your scissors. Here they are. Okay. So we need some scissors. If you don't have any scissors, just watch and you'll see how maybe you can kind of very carefully rip it. But what I'm going to do is you can see how this paper has these red margin lines. So I can see this one on this side. I can see through my paper to that one on that side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this paper. I don't want to end up with two separate pieces. It all still needs to be attached, but what I want to end up with is a gap, and I'll show you. So I'm going to start cutting. Here's where I see the red margin line on my paper. You guys all see that? I'm going to start cutting just inside of that, and I'm going to cut what I call, if you just want to watch first, you can, because you can always rewatch it. I'm going to cut what I call just a little shave cut. So I'm cutting just the tiniest bit of this edge off. By the way, I am on the folded edge. If you do this on the edge, see, this is the part that separates. I'm not cutting there. That wouldn't really do anything. I'm cutting on the crease, okay, on the fold edge. So I'm cutting, and I'm going to stop just before I get to the other red margin line, okay? And you get this little shaved piece of paper that you cut off. But the most important thing is that now when I open this, I have a gap in the middle. It's still connected on the top and on the bottom, but I have this gap in the middle, okay? And actually, I can see I didn't get very close to that red line, so I'm going to go just a little bit farther. It's okay to go up to the red line, but don't go too much past it. All right, so I have a gap on that paper. So on one of the papers, you leave it connected on the ends and have a gap in the middle. The other paper we're going to cut in the completely opposite places. So again, this is the side that opens. Okay, so I'm cutting on the crease edge. This time, instead of cutting in between the red lines, this time I'm going to leave it connected between the red lines, and I'm going to cut from the edge just past the red line. So you can even open your paper as I did. You can see, so I'm going to cut on the crease through that hole, and I'm going to cut just past the red line. Okay, now I'm going to come and do the same thing on this side. If you want to flip it over so you can see the red line, that's fine. But I'm going to cut on the crease to just past the red line. So this one's the opposite. This one is connected in the middle with flaps on the edge. All right, what are we doing with these? Well, we're going to make a little booklet that stays together without any tape or staples or anything. Okay, I'm coming back to this piece that has the gap in the middle. And I've got my 3 hole punches on the bottom just to kind of keep things lined up. I'm going to take this other piece with the 3 hole punches on the bottom, and I'm going to do this. Okay, I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to, can you see me up in the corner here? I'm going to fold it over like this, but I'm not going to actually flatten it and crease it. I'm just giving myself some space. So I just folded it over. See down here? I just folded it over, but I'm not creasing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this side here. You can pause this or rewind it and watch it a couple times if you need to. But I'm going to slide this through the gap here until I can match up. This bottom tab down here is going to tuck down to the bottom down there. And then I unfold this, get it all flat underneath here and up here, and let that tuck in there. And now, when I close this, now I have a booklet, just 4 pages in this booklet, but the pages stay together. The booklet stays together with no tape and no staples, okay? So you've got your booklet. We are now going to write some things in this booklet. We're gonna let this booklet, and I'm gonna turn it this direction. So you can see that I have 3 hole punches over here, and then I have the lines going this way, just because that will be easier to write down the things that we need to. So I need to put a title on this. This front page is gonna be my title page. And I enjoy fancy lettering and whatnot. So actually, let me show you what you need to write on here. Bam. Here is what you need the cover to say. I just paused and took a little while doodling that out because I like fancy letters. You make it as fancy or as not fancy as you want, but it needs to say on the cover Math 7 Standards, and you can put the school year on there so that you remember when you were in Math 7. 2020 and 2021 is the school year here. So that is the cover. Okay, pause it if you need to take a minute and get your own cover written, but make sure it says Math 7 Standards 2020-2021. We are going to flip this open, and because I doodled that out, that kind of goes through a little bit. So I'm not going to write on the back side of that. I'm going to come down and I'm going to write here. And what I'm going to put is I'm going to put the name of the strand. And when you've heard me say this word in class, part of the reason I want to do this today is just to make sure you are processing what I'm talking about when I talk about the strand. The strand is really just an overall math category. All of the standards that we focused on for the first 6 or 7 weeks of school were all in the NS strand. Remember I gave it that name? So I'm actually going to count down these 2 squares, or these 2 lines here, and I'm going to draw a line across like this. So you can set this up with me. It sure is a lot more fun if you have markers, but you can do it all in pencil too. Okay, so this was called, and I'm going to write the, and then I'm going to put in capital letters. And if you want to watch me write it first so that you kind of have an idea of spacing. But this strand was all about the number system. And I'm also going to write, okay, so I'm going to put this was the number system strand, and I'm going to put in parentheses that we always called it NS. That's why all of your assignments had NS on it. That's why your assessments had NS on it. It was all about the number system. Okay, so the very first strand we focused on in this class was the number system strand. This strand we're finished with, and some people, I don't know, this is your guide. Make it fun. Doodle if you want to, put little arrows, little flowers, little hearts, whatever you want. Change it up as we go. So the number system strand had 4 overall standards. So what we're going to do on this page is we're going to write down what those standards were. Hopefully they sound familiar to you because we did learn them, but this process will also just allow your brain to really go through and be like, okay, yeah, I do remember that. I remember what we did. So I'm going to come right down to this line right here, and I'm going to write standard 1. And I'm going to put a little box around it just to make it stand out. And I'm going to write the standard out in words as an I can statement. Because by the time we were done with this standard, hopefully you were saying to yourself, yeah, I can do that. So standard 1 was I can add all rational numbers. And really the thing that was new about it this year, so I'll let you write that and then we're going to add something to it. I can add all rational numbers. I'm going to put comma, including positives and negatives. So this standard was all about how we kept saying over and over and over again, same signs add, keep the common sign, different signs subtract, take the sign one that goes farther. Okay, we already knew addition from elementary, but our extension for 7th grade in this standard was I could do this with all the positives and the negatives. So the next thing I'm going to do, and I changed colors here so it looks a little different, I'm also going to write examples and underline it. Okay, the type of problems we're talking about here is stuff like -12 plus 7. How we'd say, okay, different signs subtract, take the sign of the one that goes farther, right? We also, of course, did it with fractions and decimals. So I could have something like negative 5.5 plus negative 12.2. And I'd still say, okay, same signs add, keep the common sign. So this would be negative 17.7. But this standard was all about learning these new rules and recognizing all the patterns and becoming really efficient at them. Different signs subtract, take the sign of one that goes farther. Same signs add, keep the common sign. That was standard number 1. We've completed it, but of course we still use it constantly. Okay, so these standards keep coming up. I'm going to skip a line and then I'm going to write standard 2. And I'm going to put a little box around it. Standard 2 was all about subtraction. And specifically we said, I can rewrite subtraction as addition. And then, of course, I'll put in parentheses, solve it. Right? We learned also this year that every subtraction problem can be rewritten as addition. So a couple of examples. So if I had something like negative 7 minus negative 3, we learned this year that minusing a negative, that was a big one that we focused on. Remember the extreme temperatures with the states and all that stuff? We learned you keep the first number, never change the first number, change the action to addition, and then instead of negative 3, it would be positive 3. So that's something we learned this year, is that minusing a negative is adding a positive. And then, of course, you would solve it, different sign subtract, take the sign of the one that goes farther. Okay, this was the big piece in this standard, was just, can you recognize that every single subtraction problem can be rewritten as addition? And then once you rewrite it as addition, you can just use standard 1 again. So those two definitely went together. All right, standard 3, I'm going to skip a line, and I'm going to write standard 3. Standard 3. This is where we learned about conversions. We learned more about converting rational numbers. Okay, so I'm going to say I can convert rational numbers to different forms. They're different but equivalent forms, right? I can convert rational numbers to different forms and determine, this was another big part of this, determine repeating or terminating. Okay, so this is where, well, let's write a few examples here to show ourselves. So I'm going to put examples. And this is where we would say things like, and we made a little conversion chart that a lot of you still have in the front of your math binder, which is super helpful. This is where we'd say things like, okay, 1/2 is the same as 0.5, which is a terminating decimal, right? Terminating means stopped. But we also did like, oh yeah, that's 50%. We learned that we could put it in all of these forms. A fraction, a decimal, and percent are all different ways to write rational numbers. And we learned the long division process, and then we also learned that if we just memorize some, that our life would get easier. But we also learned if some were a little crazier and things we didn't necessarily have memorized, like 7/15, we learned that, yeah, it's long division, but we could also let our calculators do that long division for us by typing in 7 divided by 15. I hope all that's familiar, because that is a skill you definitely need to hang on to. So 7 divided by 15, and then we also talked about stuff like this. This is a repeating decimal. That's not really a 7 at the end, that's just your calculator rounding. Hope all that stuff sounds familiar to you. So we would say, okay, 7/15 is equal to 0.46, repeating with the bar only over the 6. And then remember, the way that we change these to percents is we just times by 100, and it's 46.6%. you're going to review all of these things in your Canvas quiz today. So not only are we writing this down just to make sure we understand where we're coming from and what we've already completed, but also because it's going to help you with your review. All right, there was one more standard, and you guys took assessments on all of these. There was one more standard under the number system. Okay, so I'm going to skip a line here and I'm going to write down here. Standard 4 next to this hole in the paper. Standard 4. The fourth and final standard in the number system was all about multiplying and dividing. I can multiply and divide rational numbers. And this is where we used a lot of the conversions. This is where we said stuff like this. I can multiply and divide rational numbers. Okay, so let's give ourselves some examples. This is where we said, like, okay, -4/5 divided by negative, I don't know, negative, we'll just leave a fraction, I guess. This is where we'd say, okay, every division problem can be rewritten as multiplication. So we'd flip this over. And then we'd do a bunch of cross simplifying. Does that sound familiar to you? And then we'd say things like same signs, positive. Okay, so we learned all about multiplication and division in that one. We learned same signs positive, different signs negative. We used a lot of our conversions, like if we had to multiply a decimal and a fraction, then we'd change the forms. Okay, so this is all of your 7th grade stuff in the number system strand. We completed it in the first 7 weeks of school, 6 weeks of school. So you guys did adding rational numbers, same signs add, keep the common sign, different signs subtract, extend one that goes farther. You guys rewrote all of your subtraction as addition, so you could use the addition rules. You converted rational numbers into different forms and focused on repeating and terminating decimals, and you learned how to multiply and divide rational numbers, again with positives and negatives. Same signs positive, different signs negative. Number system strand. It's complete because we finished learning all this stuff, but we're always going to use it. Then we moved on to the strand we're in the middle of right now. It's the one I keep calling the EE strand. And this time we do have to write on the back of the paper. Some of the marker may have bled through a little bit depending on what you're writing with, but that's okay. This is that moment where you guys will finally get to learn what the other E stands for. So I'm going to draw a line across here so I can put my heading up here. This is the EE strand. You ready? I'm going to show you. We know this one, expressions. And the other one is the one that you guys have been dying to know what it is. The expressions, and you ready? Are you ready? See that word? Expressions and equations. This is the expressions and equations strand. And we call that, I'm going to put in parentheses, we have been calling that, of course, the EE strand. And now you guys know it's expressions and equations. Expressions and equations. We've mostly focused on all of the standards that have to do with expressions. And term 2, starting next week, that's when we're going to really get into all the standards that involve equations. So right now, I'm actually only going to go through the ones we've already done, and we will come back. You'll keep this booklet, and we will come back and keep adding standards to this booklet as we work on them so that you have this overall picture of what is it that Mrs. McGowan is teaching me here. So this one is one that we've completed. Standard 1. Again, I'm going to write it as an I can statement. Standard 1 is I can simplify expressions and recognize equivalent expressions. simplify expressions and recognize equivalent expressions. And this includes the use of the distributive property. Okay, so you'd simplify expressions involving the distributive property. Let's write one example. Switching up the colors here for this strand. An example is if I said -4 times x minus 3 plus 7x. That was all of standard 1 that you worked on a lot during week 7 and 8. We would, of course, distribute here. -4 times x is -4x. -4 times -3 is plus 12. And then we'd have our plus 7x. And then we'd finish simplifying. -4x plus 7x is 3x plus 12. And not only was this a simplifying expressions problem, because this end one, 3x plus 12, is simpler to read than this beginning one, but actually this is an example of this expression right here is equivalent to this expression, and they're also equivalent to this. This is actually 3 equivalent expressions. They've just used mathematical properties to make them simpler to read. So that was standard 1. We did a bunch of stuff with simplifying expressions and equivalent expressions. I'm going to skip a line because we have also done standard 2. That is what you worked on all last week. And standard 2 says, I can write a variable expression to represent a situation. And this was a big one, so I'm going to put this in parentheses, including percents. One specifically mentioned in the 7th grade core. It's an important one, and part of that is because we come back to percents a lot in a later strand, and we'll use this skill a lot. So, for example, if we said a shirt is 25% off, we now know that we can write an expression like this. We can say x minus 0.25x. And we of course know, because of what we did in standard 1, we know that we can simplify that to 0.75x. If you get a 25% discount, you pay 75%. Now I'm going to write a spot for, skip that.
Kelly Warwood.
I am going to write standard 3. But I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. You're going to hang on to this booklet and you're going to add standards to this as we complete them within our modules. I'll put that in the videos, and there will be different points where I say, okay, everybody get out your booklet. Now we're ready to write down what standard 3 is. Okay. Now there are 5 total strands in the 7th grade core. Number system is one of the strands. Expressions and equations is another strand. And you'll see we have spots in the rest of this booklet for the remaining strands. And I'm going to tell you right now, because I know for some of you it just killed you to be in suspense on what that other E stood for. I am actually going to tell you right now what the rest of the strands are called. Of course, we haven't done any of the standards in them yet. We have lots of school year left, 3 more terms to get to them all, and we will get to them all. But I'm going to tell you the title of all of them right now. So we have the number system, the NS strand. We have the equations and expressions, the EE strand. I'm going to skip 2 lines on this next paper here. Draw a line down here. And I'm going to tell you this strand name is the ratios and proportions strand. You can wait till my hand moves to make sure you spell all this stuff correctly. The ratios and proportions strand, which you'll hear me call it RP when we get to that. We'll start it in 2nd term. Okay, do a lot of that in 2nd and 3rd term. I'll even put a spot here so that we're ready. Call it standard 1. So we're all ready to start listing those. So you got NS, EE, RP, I'm going to flip the paper over now. And on the top of this page in the booklet, I'm going to tell you what the next one's called. I'm going to skip down these 2 lines, draw a line here. This is a fun one. It's a word you've probably heard before. Only one word on this one, not N-S-E-E, not 2 letters, only one. Does that word look familiar to you? We definitely have a geometry strand this year, and you guessed it, it's G, geometry strand. Those standards will be just labeled with a G. The geometry strand. I'll get this ready. Okay, we'll get to lots of those in 3rd term. And then most of 4th term will be spent on the 5th and final strand, which is, it also has 2 words and they're kind of long words. So maybe watch me write them so you can fit them all. Again, though, I'm going to skip 2 lines and draw a line. The 5th and final strand is the statistics and probability strand. And you guessed it, this is the SP strand. We're going to have lots of standards under statistics and probability. We'll just get it ready. This is what we spend the bulk of 4th term talking about, is statistics and probability. So now your booklet is ready. What I want you to do is I want you to get your math binder here, and I'm just going to take my booklet because we're going to keep adding to it. That's why I wanted to make the front all fancy, because I know I'm going to keep it. You can slide it. Some people like to slide it in the back cover if you don't already have anything there. You can slide it in the back cover so that you always know where it is. Or if you have space in either the front or back pockets in the binder, you can just put it in the front pocket of the binder as well. But make sure wherever you put it, make sure that you know exactly where it is in your math binder, because there will definitely be times where I'll say, hey, we finished another standard, or we're ready to write down another standard, and we'll get that booklet out and we'll keep adding to it until we get all of the standards for the year. Because pandemic doesn't matter. We got this. We are going to learn every single bit of the math standards that you are supposed to learn this year. All right, so for your Canvas quiz today, you are practicing all the standards we've done so far. So you're not going to have any SP questions. You're not going to have any geometry questions. We haven't gotten to all that yet. You're going to have questions about the NS standards we've done and the EE standards we've done. If you have any questions, of course,